Tonight at 10, a couple who killed a 6-year-old boy are jailed. The judge says it's one of the most distressing cases he has ever dealt with. Arthur Labinia Hughes died after sustaining head injuries at his home in Solihull. He'd been abused, starved and poisoned. He was murdered by his 32-year-old stepmother. His father, Thomas Hughes, was found guilty of manslaughter. Also on the programme tonight, the chaos at Wembley during the Euro 2020 final. An inquiry says lives were put at risk as ticketless fans stormed into the England-Italy final. Still reconnecting a week after Storm Irwin hit the UK, thousands are spending their 8th night without power. The worst drought in years, stretching across a huge swathe of East Africa. Tens of millions of people are facing severe food shortages.
Not all so much for love as for another secret close intent by marrying her.
And the Royal Shakespeare Company leads tributes to Sir Anthony Sher, who has died of cancer at the age of 72.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News channel, Lewis Hamilton's performance in F1 practice ramps up the pressure on world title rival Max Verstappen.
Good evening. A woman has been jailed for life for murdering her partner's 6-year-old son after months of abuse. Emma Tustin has been told she will serve at least 29 years in prison for killing Arthur Labinia Hughes at their home in Solihull. The boy's father, Thomas Hughes, has been jailed for 21 years for manslaughter. The judge at Coventry Crown Court said it had been one of the most distressing cases he'd dealt with and described the couple as spiteful and sadistic. As our home editor, Mark Easton, reports, Arthur's death raises yet more questions about whether enough is being done to protect vulnerable children.
Arthur, are you going to play for England?
He was a football-mad little boy with a smile that belied the truth about his life. 6-year-old Arthur Labinia Hughes was, in the words of a judge today, the victim of cruel, manipulative and pitiless treatment. Emma Tustin and her boyfriend Thomas Hughes were today jailed for killing little Arthur. Tustin was sentenced to life for murder with a minimum of 29 years, Hughes for 21 years for manslaughter.
Arthur was told to sit on the thinking step. Arthur's put himself all over the floor, he's banged himself off the radiator, he's hit me, he's kicked me in the process of me trying to get him back on the thinking step.
The pair lied to police as Arthur lay just a few feet away with injuries so severe they were said to be the equivalent of a high-speed road crash. Members of Arthur's family were close to tears as they left court. His birth mother, currently in jail for manslaughter, had a statement read in court. "I feel that I'm walking around with all the lights off. He was the light of my life. He was a precious, precious gift. His short life was stolen, and the hole left in me and those who loved Arthur will never be repaired." We've been here many times before. A public inquiry in 2003 following Victoria Clambier's death. A national review after the baby Peter Connolly case. Investigations into the deaths of Kira Ishak, Hamza Khan, Daniel Pelka, Aisha Jane Smith, amid profound soul-searching as to what we should do to save vulnerable children from neglect and abuse and death.
If you do have a concern about a child, contact your local authority, keep contacting them, or contact the NSPCC helpline. We're a confidential free advice service and we're there to listen and form a picture for other agencies like social care, like the police, and we're there to provide advice and support.
A report for the Department of Education last year found that the number of children who die from maltreatment in England remains at around 28 every year. That's more than one child every 2 weeks. So why are things still going so tragically wrong? The report says that Children's Services departments struggle because of outsourcing and because of cuts.
It's not just about the quantity of the work.
Professor Jonathan Dickens, who was among the academics who wrote the report for the government, says frontline social workers need to be supported to ask the difficult questions.
Social workers do need help in that concept. It's sometimes called professional curiosity. Asking the second question, the third question, respectfully, politely, but persistently, and putting the pieces together. The story doesn't quite add up.
What's described as a once-in-a-generation review of England's children's social care system is underway, with a debate about when to work with families and when to take children into care.
Resources have been stretched further and further as more children are coming onto the radar. There are more children in care in England, over 80,000 now, than for some time. So although funding has gone up, the demand for that funding has gone up disproportionately.
A serious case review will look at the missed opportunities to save Arthur. 4 calls made by worried relatives to the council, his school, social services and the police. A visit to his home finding no safeguarding concerns. Questions too about the impact of COVID restrictions. The appalling details of little Arthur's life and death are too much for many to listen to. But we must listen and learn. Mark Easton, BBC News.
An independent review has described the chaotic scenes at Wembley Stadium during the Euro 2020 final this summer as a source of national shame. Around 2,000 people without tickets managed to get into the stadium as England took on Italy. The report's author, Baroness Louise Casey, said the behaviour of a minority of England's supporters was not just disgraceful, but also recklessly endangered lives. Our sports editor, Dan Roan, reports.
Appalling disorder on a day of national shame. The damning findings of the investigation into the scenes that marred England's biggest match since 1966. Many fans left terrified after being caught up in the chaos. Today, the woman whose report lays bare the gravity of the mayhem at Wembley told me it was fortunate that no one died.
Well, I think what happened was a very near miss, and that near miss would be a significant loss of life or injuries, probably on a scale that sadly we saw at Hillsborough. So I think the benefit of it being a near miss is actually that we can learn from it to make sure it never happens again.
The report found unprecedented levels of criminal and antisocial behaviour and that 2,000 people got in illegally via 17 entry points. Almost half of surveyed respondents saw illegal drug taking, and fans with disabilities were targeted, with a child wheelchair user snatched from their father and used to try to gain entry by one thug pretending to be a steward. With hooligans hoping to reach the thousands of empty seats inside Wembley, the report found a perfect storm of factors and a collective failure in planning.
The police weren't on the ground early enough. They thought they were early, they weren't early enough. The stewarding at the stadium was not robust enough, and there wasn't a fan zone.
Remarkably, the report found that England's defeat to Italy averted a potential disaster, with 6,000 thugs outside poised to storm Wembley if they'd won.
I apologise absolutely for the experience that many fans had on that day. What we should have done is step back and looked at it as a completely unique event and understood that people would potentially get there earlier, and we needed, for example, to get law enforcement there earlier.
While the report said no single agency was to blame, it found a number of organisations, including the FA and the police, failed to mitigate what it called foreseeable risk.
I am really sorry that so many people who came to London to enjoy a football match were met with unprecedented scenes of disorder. Whilst we had policing presence in Wembley across the day, we accept that the bulk of this was not present early enough to prevent scenes of disorder.
Today's report recommends that the FA leads a new national campaign designed to improve supporter behaviour, tougher security laws and more banning orders, and the establishment of a new category for matches of national significance to acknowledge the unique challenges in making such events secure. The FA must stage England's next home game in European competition behind closed doors. For what happened here, it's now clear that it could have proved much more costly. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Wembley.
The UK's decision to offer just the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines as a COVID booster appears to have paid off after trials showed that they give the best overall response. 7 different jabs were tested. Researchers also said there were good signs that the vaccines still protect against the Omicron variant. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh reports.
We don't know what's going in, do we?
Amid the gloom over Omicron and its potential threat, some encouraging news. It was back in the summer that nearly 3,000 UK volunteers got one of 7 different COVID vaccines as a booster shot, 3 months after their second dose.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
For those boosted with Pfizer after 2 doses of AstraZeneca, their antibody levels were 25 times higher than a control group after 1 month. When Pfizer was given after 2 Pfizer shots, antibody levels rose 8-fold, but from a much higher initial level. Moderna and other combinations also worked well. The study didn't look at Omicron. It has mutations in the spike protein, which may make antibodies less able to bind onto it and prevent infection. But the bigger the antibody army, the better. T cells, another part of the immune system, were also significantly boosted. These can spot and destroy infected cells. The study showed boosters worked well against beta and delta variants, so it's likely they will also protect from serious disease with Omicron.
All of the vaccines actually showed a good T-cell response. For the antibodies, Moderna and Pfizer were very high. We're very hopeful that the vaccines will provide a broad protection against multiple variants, although we can't say for certain at this moment whether they're going to work very well against Omicron or not.
In South Africa, the first real-world evidence has shown Omicron may evade some of our immunity. Scientists have found a surge in the number of people being reinfected with COVID. But we still don't know whether Omicron causes more serious illness and what ability it may have to spread in the UK, where so much of the population is double or triple jabbed. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, boosters are set to be offered to all adults over the age of 18, and the gap between second and third doses have been halved from 6 to 3 months. But some people are being turned away at vaccine hubs. As our health editor Hugh Pym reports, the plans to significantly ramp up the vaccination programme may not happen for another week in England.
Vaccination centres, including this one in Hertfordshire, are getting busier as people are invited to come forward for their jabs. But the message to the public is there's a need to be patient, as big changes to the booster programme announced this week haven't yet been introduced.
People will be notified. They've been notified previously either through text or through letters, so I'm expecting it to be the same again. So please wait for those notifications.
But staff say they've had problems with some who arrive thinking they can now get a booster.
So some people are just, demanding to want to come in at a particular time to have their vaccination, even when they may not be eligible currently. People shouting and demanding to want to be seen. But we do all we can to calm people and to explain why we have to wait.
Yay! Those who are eligible for a booster have been contacted and are pleased to get it done. In Scotland, those over 40 can now book a booster if it's been 3 months since the second dose. In Northern Ireland, that policy will be implemented over the next few weeks. The message in Wales is that people should wait for an invitation for a booster. Scotland's National Clinical Director says the whole programme is a major undertaking.
This is the biggest logistical NHS exercise since the war. We shouldn't underestimate how many people are having to do this. The managers, the clinicians, the community hall workers, the volunteers. It's a fantastic effort to get these vaccines into people's arms.
NHS leaders in England are waiting for new legal guidelines before a full rollout of the extended booster programme can start, possibly in a week's time. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Hertfordshire.
Well, the government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were 50,584 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, 44,636 cases were reported per day in the last week. 7,373 people were in hospital with COVID as of yesterday. There were 143 deaths. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, which means the average number of deaths over the past 7 days was 119. The total number of people who've died with COVID now stands at 145,424. On vaccinations, 88.8% of people aged 12 and over have now received a first dose, 80.8% have been double jabbed, and more than 19.4 million people have received their booster jab. Well, tonight, Ireland has reintroduced a series of public health measures that will come into effect next Tuesday for 1 month. They include a maximum of 6 people at a table in restaurants and table service only, a limit on the number of households socialising indoors. Nightclubs will also have to close again. Well, let's talk to our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy, who joins us now. And they are quite tight, these restrictions, yet cases seem to have stopped rising. Why now?
They have in the Republic of Ireland, but this is a sign of just how concerned the Irish government is about the new Omicron variant. So tonight, the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, said that they're watching very closely the sharp rise in cases in South Africa. While there's only one case of Omicron in Ireland at the moment, he said if it was to take hold in the Irish Republic, we could be in for a very serious crisis indeed. Now, so it means a return, a big step back really, to things like table service only, reduced capacity at sporting events and concerts, and nightclubs which have only just reopened in the Irish Republic will have to close again. But in contrast, here in Northern Ireland today, we heard the Deputy First Minister Michelle O'Neill saying that there were no plans in Northern Ireland for a return to stricter restrictions in the run-up to Christmas. So we're going to be back in that situation with two different sets of rules operating in two parts of this island. Inevitably, some people will cross the border to take advantage of that.
Emma Vardy, thank you. Thousands of people in parts of northeast England and Scotland are still without power a week after Storm Irwin left a trail of destruction. The energy regulator Ofgem has launched an urgent review into the response of the energy network companies. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon has been finding out how people have been coping in Aberdeenshire.
In the winter sun, Aberdeenshire looks stunning, but this has been a brutally hard week for many here, and 7 days on from Storm Irwin, its impact is still being felt.
Have you got your power back on again?
No, it's not on yet. No, but it went off on Friday. It's Friday, the day of the wind. Yeah. Oh, there's been trees blowing down a lot before, but I mean, this is worst I've seen.
For some, no power meant no water either. So bottled water was brought in for drinking, and at night this family huddled together for warmth. Like many we spoke to, they were disappointed at the information they'd received.
You just felt like crying sometimes. You couldn't. Like I say, I think it was the false promises as well. That was, we kept getting emails off them saying it'll be on at 6 o'clock, it'll be on at 12 o'clock. And then last night, the army came. It was 2 army blokes came, but that was the first people that's been to check that you're all right. There's nobody. You're just being left to fend yourself.
People here rallied around to look out for each other. This farmer receiving hot food from a Good Samaritan, determined to help.
We rely on good friends and good neighbours. Excuse me. We rely on good friends and good neighbours. If it wasn't for these, it wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be good.
You come together as a community?
You have to. You have to. In these difficult times.
Downed power lines meant the local primary school has been shut all week. Children staying at home.
I think one of the best parts has been I got to play a bunch of board games with my family. One part that I didn't like is my friend's den got destroyed.
And if the power does ever go out again, their mum is determined to be prepared.
I'm ripping out my electric heater, and there'll be a log burner in there and a gas. We won't be left out vulnerable like this again, and we'll have a generator.
Really?
Yeah.
Big changes ahead.
Yeah, definitely.
Engineers have been working round the clock to restore supplies. Tonight, more houses here are finally being reconnected. People will be hoping what's been described as a once-in-a-generation event remains exactly that. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Crudi in Aberdeenshire.
The Taliban have issued a decree calling for serious action to enforce women's rights in Afghanistan. It bans forced marriage but does not mention employment or education. Our Afghanistan correspondent Sikandar Kamani is in Kandahar for us tonight. And what has the reaction been to this?
Well, look, the rights laid out in this decree, no forced marriages, as you say, inheritance for widows, these have long been accepted parts of Islamic law, but in poorer Muslim countries like Afghanistan, they've often not been implemented. So in more rural areas, for example, it's not uncommon for young women to be married off to pay off debts or to help end family feuds. And women's rights activists here say that if this does help end abusive practices, of course, that's a good thing. But they've also been struck by the complete failure of this decree to mention anything about women's right to work or to get an education. And that will fuel suspicion that the Taliban here are attempting to dampen down international criticism whilst at the same time kowtowing to their own more hardline elements.
Sikandar Kamani in Afghanistan, thank you. Let's take a look now at some of today's other news, and there have been further resignations at Yorkshire County Cricket Club in the wake of the racism scandal that engulfed it. 16 more people have left, including the Director of Cricket, Martin Moxon, as well as the head coach and all members of the coaching staff. The Conservatives have held the seat of Old Bexley and Sidcup in yesterday's by-election, but with a reduced majority. Their candidate, Louis French, won more than half the votes in the South East London constituency, with Labour in second. Tens of millions of people are facing severe food shortages across a huge area of East Africa as the region faces the worst drought for many years. Crops are failing and animals on which many communities depend are dying of thirst. There have been 3 years of poor rainfall in northern Kenya, much of Somalia and southern Ethiopia. It's feared the drought will continue long into next year, putting millions of lives at risk. The BBC's senior Africa correspondent Anne Soy reports now from northern Kenya.
The devastating impact of drought. This is Wajir in northern Kenya. They've not had enough rain here for 3 consecutive seasons. Water ponds have long dried up. There are dead animals everywhere. Even at Ahmed Ibrahim's home. He's 66 and tells me he's never witnessed anything like this.
The drought has been going on for the last 9 months. I had 150 heads of cattle, but now left with about 30, which are very weak. I also had 400 goats. I'm only left with these few that you can see.
A few times every day, neighbors help to lift the remaining livestock so they can stretch their already weak muscles. Tough decisions he has to make to balance between feeding his family and his livestock.
The remaining livestock will continue dying, but the biggest issue is what will people eat? People who have lost everything. What will they eat?
That's Saadia's biggest worry too. The 47-year-old mother of 6 is only left with these goats. Livestock are a harder source of livelihood and wealth. Losing them leaves them poorer and hungry.
I believe God provides, but at this rate, we're at risk of dying because of starvation.
This is the Sabuli Wildlife Conservancy, one of many in northern Kenya, and the effects of drought here are all too clear. And that is a very unusual sight, a dead giraffe inside a wildlife conservancy, and yet we are told that at least 11 of those have been found within months. And it is not just giraffes that are affected, it is all wildlife. There's no pasture, there's no water for them.
More frequent droughts suggest climate change is already taking its toll in the region. The impact on people is devastating. Loss of livelihood and a direct threat to survival. Anne Soy, BBC News, Wajir.
Scientists in Britain have used gene editing technology to create female-only and male-only litters of mice. They say their technique could eventually be applied to chickens to ensure that only egg-producing females are hatched. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh reports.
Half of these chicks are useless to the farming industry because they're male and don't lay eggs, so they have to be killed. That problem could be solved thanks to a breakthrough that enables scientists to reprogram animals to produce only females.
Some 6 to 7 billion male layer chicks are killed every year shortly after birth, at a point when they have a nervous system and are capable of suffering. We would like to be able to move to a system where those same eggs are laid, but instead never hatch.
Scientists at the Francis Crick Institute in London have found that the system was successful in mice, and they think it'll work on chickens. The researchers here have found a way of deactivating a gene involved with embryo development. The system can be programmed to stop either male or female embryos from developing using a technique called gene editing. The sex of a mammal is determined by its chromosomes. Females have a pair of X's, males have an X and a Y. The process involves inserting half the gene editing molecule into the father's Y chromosome and the other half into the mother's DNA. After mating, male XY embryos containing both halves of the gene editing molecule will not develop, but female embryos will grow normally. Gene editing can be used to make other genetic changes. These piglets are resistant to a lung disease that often devastates herds. The government is considering whether to allow the use of the technology by the farming industry. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
The actor Sir Anthony Sher has died at the age of 72. Sir Anthony, who had cancer, was widely regarded as one of the country's finest contemporary classical actors with a long association with the Royal Shakespeare Company. David Sillito looks back at his life.
Deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up.
Anthony Sher's Richard III, a scuttling, spidery malevolence. It went beyond mere good reviews to become the portrayal against which all others are measured.
When they are gone, then must I count my gains.
Your hands, Nigel.
Howard Kirk and the History Man, the defining 70s campus radical.
Perhaps we should just add his name, save, you know that.
I think my biggest problem is being young and beautiful. It is my biggest problem, because I have never been young and beautiful.
Arnold, the drag queen in Torch Song Trilogy, another Olivier Award-winning role.
Oh, I've been beautiful.
Anthony Sher was also an accomplished writer and painter, but this career had begun with rejection from RADA.
They sent a letter saying, we strongly recommend that you think about another career, which, at that time was, really puts you on the line.
Gay, Jewish, South African. Growing up, he felt very much the outsider. He liked the idea of disguise, and his home became the Shakespearean stage. Many of his greatest roles directed by the man who would become his husband, Greg Doran.
Hail Rome!
Titus Andronicus.
Victorious in thy mourning weeds.
Iago.
The moor already changes with my poison.
Lear.
Do not make me mad!
Troubled, complex, compelling. The characters of Sir Anthony Sher.
Sir Anthony Sher, who has died at the age of 72. And that's it from us now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Good night.